how do you decide? And this is where I'm going to get into some advice for our founders who are part of Startups.com, the Accelerator. How do you decide if your idea is good and to do it?
See, I used to think that like, if I thought about it long enough, if I spent enough time on a whiteboard, or if I spent enough time with smart people, you know, in a conference room and talked to enough advisors, that I'd know if my idea was good. And here's what I would say. No one knows if their idea is good, but I can tell you when yours is just awful, right? Like, like awful has a pretty distinct look and feel to it. And as you know, we see 20,000 new companies a month at Startups.com. So we see everything. We've been doing this for a long time. This is like, we're 10, 12 years into this. The pattern matching looks something like this. 50% of what we see are just bad ideas. Now, when I say that, I don't mean that they're bad entrepreneurs or bad companies, whatever. It's just fairly clear that it's some combination between that either the idea's already been done. Early in Startups.com, you know how many times we got pitched Facebook? Like from people who maybe hadn't heard of Facebook? Like, imagine if you could go online and you could look up all your friends from like back in high school. And I'm like Facebook? Face what? I'm like, okay, all right. And technically, it's a good idea. It worked out all right. But my point is, the pattern matching is the bad ideas look something like either they've been done before, or it really doesn't. It's not that big of an innovation, or it's very clear that the person pitching it doesn't have a shot in hell of ever making that actually work. Okay. Now, the good ideas, which is what you're talking about, how do I know if I've got a good idea? The answer is you don't, because what you have right now is 1 to 5% of what the good idea might be. The rest of it, you have to go discover by building the thing, getting out there, talking to customers, realizing how wrong you were, and refining. Right now, we're using Google version like 1000. So rewind back to what Google was 1,000 versions ago, and it was like nothing like it is now, right? I mean, it's so expansive, right? The idea is you just got to get out there. And usually that first 5% is how people start learning about you and how they start discovering you and how you build with them. So it's just a matter of getting your hooks out there.
I would say that first, the idea has to be sensical, such as all the factors that you put in. Is there founder problem fit?
Yep.
Does this make sense? Can they articulate it? And then if there's a better than 0% chance, you can pull off, because some of these ideas are batshit crazy that we see founders come with, right? But you look at them and you're like, okay, I could see a better than 0% chance than pulling it off. But then after that, you're saying you don't know. How do we find out? So that's where we're going to get to the MVP. Walk me through, in your history, doing 9 ventures, what are the most successful ways to do an MVP and find out whether you're on the right track?
I'll give you an actual example of how we did it. When I was building all those properties, all those different internet companies, I was on like my 6th. So we had been doing a bunch of these. And the last 2 were both venture funded startups. The Afford It one that I just mentioned was the one I had been doing prior. So I was still running that, but I had an idea for yet another company. And this company would become Unsubscribe.com. And the idea behind Unsubscribe.com in like 2008, if I remember the vintage right, was that email was a huge problem because you were getting swarmed with spam. And a lot of it was actually what I'd call legitimate spam. Like you did sign up for that, but you kept getting it. And back then there wasn't a good way to get off of spam. We take it for granted now because there's unsubscribe buttons, etc. They didn't exist back then. So I said there's 800 million, this back then, there's 800 million active email addresses on the internet even back then. It's literally the biggest problem by size. How do we test out whether people want an unsubscribe button in their email client, right? Back then, Outlook was still popular and Gmail was just starting to come around. I call up a couple friends of mine. One was Josh Roth, who had come from some really big exits. This is in the Los Angeles area. And the other one was Jamie Siminoff, who and after that founded Ring, the doorbell company. And I said, guys, I've got this great idea. Let's test it out. And Josh, who was the CTO, was like, hey, man, the amount of intelligence it's going to take to parse all these emails and build this thing will take forever, right? You know, in order to figure out how they all work. I was like, dude, we're not going to do any of that. I was like, here's what we're going to do. We're going to call up a bunch of USC students and we're going to have them sit there. And as people hit the unsubscribe button, we're going to forward it to an inbox. They're going to find the unsubscribe button and they're going to click unsubscribe. So there's a clip out there somewhere, and I haven't even looked at it for so long. We launched this thing, right? And all we do is we just make the buttons available for your client. In one of the big, like, kind of prior to podcast, it was just like a web show, but they did reviews of software and startups all the time. They'd heard about this. They heard about this Unsubscribe.com, and it had such a cool name, right? They're on there and they're running it in real time, and we're watching this live while they're like, now watch what's going to happen. I'm going to hit unsubscribe, right? Boom! 2 seconds later, I'm unsubscribed. This is the most incredible tech I've ever. It's like, as he's doing it, we're watching the emails come on. We're like, boop, unsubscribe. So now, does that scale? Absolutely not, right? Not even 1%, right? It couldn't even come close. But let me tell you, it proved very quickly that the demand was there. And I remember the first person that reached out to us because they'd heard about it was Fred Wilson from Union Square Ventures. And Jamie had a relationship with Fred. And Fred's like, this is amazing. Like, I want in. And as soon as that, like, blood was in the water that this was a thing, we got tons of offers. We raised all our venture in 48 hours over the weekend, no less. It was incredible. When people talk about building their MVP, they're usually thinking of, like, what's a smaller but functional version of what we need to have? When in fact, the MVP just needs to test. When somebody presses the button, do they get the response they want, however you get there, to see if they care? Because 90% of the time, they will not. And you were on to building the wrong product.
That's what we call, in startup land, do things that don't scale.
Yeah.
You had an assumption and you said, let's prove it out manually with the least amount of tech as possible.
Yep.
Where founders get all wrapped up and they say, oh, this isn't going to be automated. This is not going to scale. These days, it's like, how do I get AI to do this for me? You're like, no, let's just make an assumption and see if we're validated or invalidated as fast as possible.
Yeah.
And based on that alone, you got all your investment in 48 hours.
Yeah, I mean, literally based on nothing else. And to be fair, I don't think we ever figured out how to actually make it work. we ended up selling the company to Trusted ID a couple years later. It cracked me up because it was such a good idea that probably in today's terms, people have obviously figured it out. You know, Google figured it out eventually. But I mean, we were in Yahoo Mail and stuff like that back in the day, like, you know, way, way earlier than a lot of this stuff was available.
So I'm curious. Let's get back to ideas.